Good afternoon, and welcome everyone to the final session of the Portsmouth Institute's virtual summer conference on the theme, As I Have Loved You, Exploring the Dimensions of Christian Love. My name is Chris Fisher. I'm the Executive Director of the Portsmouth Institute for Faith and Culture, which is a sponsored organization between Portsmouth Abbey and St. Louis Abbey. I wanted to start the session today by saying how thankful I am to everybody the past 3 days for the wonderful speakers and the participants for engaging in the conference. It's really been quite moving. The discussions have been insightful and invigorating, and I can't tell you how pleased I am with how things have gone. I don't think anybody thought a year ago that we'd still be in the position of doing virtual, and thankfully it looks like we're moving beyond it. But even still, the conversations have been edifying and deeply humane. I want to thank everyone again for participating in the conference this week. If you've enjoyed the program as much as I have, I invite you to learn more about the Portsmouth Institute at portsmouthinstitute.org, where you can also support our work with a donation. The majority of our funding comes from individual donors like you, so I want to consider inviting you here to support our work. Before we begin, I want to thank our sponsor for the day, Wyoming Catholic College. President Glenn Arbery gave a great talk this morning on Shakespeare, Christian love and loving our enemies. That was learned and humane in the way that President Arbery is able to do. Jason Baxter, a professor at Wyoming Catholic, joined us yesterday. They're doing wonderful and important work for the church. So I want to thank them for sponsoring all the programs over the course of today and for their witness to the faith. This session, our final session of the conference, will examine the relationship between culture, the nuns, that's N-O-N-E-S, and Christian love. That is, I think, to what extent is the creation of Christian culture a means of evangelization? And we're blessed to have with us two leading thinkers on this topic, Brandon McGinley and Chad Pecknold. Brandon McGinley is a Catholic writer and speaker based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Post, First Things, and The Lamp, among other venues. He's also a contributing editor to Plough Quarterly. His first book, The Prodigal Church, Restoring Catholic Tradition in an Age of Deception, was released by Sophia Institute Press in June 2020. And his most recent book, co-authored with Scott Hahn, is It Is Right and Just, How the Future of Civilization Depends on True Religion. Brandon is a frequent guest speaker for the Portsmouth Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome him back again. Dr. Chad Pecknold received his PhD from the University of Cambridge, and since 2008, he has been a professor of historical and systematic theology in the School of Theology at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Professor Pecknold has authored or edited 5 books, each relating to the thought of St. Augustine, to modern philosophical and theological reasoning. He teaches in the areas of fundamental theology, Christian anthropology, and political theology. In political theology, Pecknold is principally concerned with close readings of Augustine's masterwork, The City of God, as a fundamental and transcendent vision that inspires and has the power to critique and correct the dynamics of Western civilization. I know his expertise there will be a huge boon for our conversation today. Professor Pecknold is also a frequent contributor to debates in the public square. He writes regularly for publications including the Catholic Herald, First Things, Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, and National Review on a range of timely topics related to the importance and impact of church teaching on social and political questions. Professor Pecknold is frequently sought after for his opinion on current events and has been quoted in hundreds of news outlets around the world, such as the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post. It's really, it's a privilege for me and an honor for me to have these two distinguished guests with us to close out our summer conference. A note on the format. In a minute, I'll welcome each of the speakers to offer 10 minutes of opening remarks. After each speaker presents their initial thoughts, I'd like to give the speakers a chance to comment, respond, and ask each other questions on their remarks and dig in a little deeper for about 15 minutes or so. After that, I'll begin integrating audience questions into the conversation. So feel free at any point in the conversation to submit questions using the Q&A function. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brandon to lead us off.
Thank you so much, Chris, for the kind introduction, and I'm so excited to be here today with Chad. I'm going to begin by talking about how it is said, or sometimes assumed, and other times said explicitly outright, that being straightforward about the church's claims about herself, about society, about politics, about culture, that go beyond the competency that is assigned to her by secular liberal societies, secular liberal civilization. It is said that to go beyond that competency is somehow anti-evangelical, even to shirk our duty to love our neighbor. And in fact, Dr. Hahn and I received some criticism of our book, as you said, Chris, It Is Right and Just, which is about the virtue of religion, and how the virtue of religion is a public virtue, not just a private virtue, how it involves public duties, both public duties in the sense of public worship at Mass or other liturgical worship, of course, things like processions that are even more public, but also public in the sense that it involves man socially. It involves the institutions that we build that need to reflect the reality and recognize the reality of the Church of Jesus Christ and of reality itself. And we don't just bring this up out of nowhere. This is not Scott Hahn and Brandon McGinley's bespoke definition of religion. It's right in the Catechism. It says the duty of offering God genuine worship concerns man both individually and socially. That's something of a bomb that is just an unexploded mine sitting there in the middle of the Catechism that has implications that go far beyond, I think, what most people realize. And so in making this case that the virtue of religion, which is a virtue of justice, a virtue by which we do justice as far as our human capabilities will allow, do justice to God for our very existence, for all the good that he has done for us, it is said that to bring this up and to draw out the implications, the public, cultural, civil implications of it, is to be somehow anti-evangelical. We've been told this specifically. And as far as I'm concerned, and certainly as far as Dr. Hahn is concerned as well, nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, as we wrote the book, we were thinking very explicitly of the book as an evangelical text, as a text that would draw people into the faith precisely by making the kind of big claims that are rooted in tradition, but also are right there waiting to be found in the more modern documents of the church. And so we argue that not recognizing this religious reality, not recognizing our duties by virtue our duties in justice to God, either as individuals or as families or as communities, as institutions, as states in some way, shape, or form, this does not result, and you can only look around us and see that the truth of this does not result in a broad toleration. It does not result in a kind of a million flowers blooming and everybody being able to go their merry way and live precisely as they see fit without any sort of interference. What ends up happening, sometimes sooner, sometimes later, in every individual life and in every family and ultimately in every society, is that the failure to perform those duties in religion, those duties of worship, that is not a matter of ambivalence or indifference. The result is always and everywhere the enthronement of some other idol on the throne that has been emptied. In the lives of individuals, of course, we can think of all the things that we might talk about, all the vices of greed, and these days even of actual idols that are gaining in popularity once again. Of course, politics, identity politics, and bringing the partisan to a level of almost religious fervor that that is not suited to. And so, if we're going to truly love the nuns, as we talk about, N-O-N-E-S, those who find themselves completely adrift in this world, who who don't recognize, by virtue of calling themselves nuns, the necessity of religion, we love them best by bringing them the genuine article, by making deep claims, not just on them as individuals, but on them as members of families, on them as members of societies, by articulating a way of being in the world that that is anchored not just in tradition, but also in heaven, a dual anchor that gives them something to hold on to that is deeply human and deeply humane, and at the same time points them to a heavenly destiny that goes beyond anything that politics can articulate or promise. Because who could look around right now and deny that politics is making eschatological promises, is making promises that are almost taking on a supernatural tinge, and that is appealing to people because it gives those who thought they didn't need anything to latch onto but are realizing they do. It's giving them something to hold on to. It's giving them something to feel, brings them an identity that goes beyond themselves and goes beyond consumerism, and that's profoundly human. If it's not going to be the church, it's going to be something else that acts like the church. Something else that puts idols, that puts gods who are far less merciful on the throne than the one whom we worship. And so it's important for us then to see this task of articulating the necessity of building Christian culture, both in the sense of participation in politics, but also in the sense of our own everyday lives, building the kind of families and then neighborhoods and communities that can be proofs of concept for a better way of being in the world. That is an act of evangelical love. That is an act of attraction, even you might even say of accompaniment, because it gives those who are looking, those who are searching, those who want something to hold on to, it gives them something to be accompanied into. You can't just accompany them around wandering. You have to give them something that's appealing, something that demonstrates not only that the faith we profess is abstractly true, but that it's transformative, that you can organize your entire life around it, not just 1 hour a week or an hour and a half a week, as the case may be, at Mass, but 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and not just within the privacy of your own home. Yes, liturgical processions, but also friendship, hospitality, growing in vulnerability and trust with friends that demonstrate that it's possible to do so without becoming angry and standoffish. So building these cultures is an act of love. It's an act, I would say specifically, of evangelical love. And so it's important also then, as we talk about this, and as we talk about this kind of culture building, not just in the sense, both in the sense of the praxis of building these communities, building a culture, but also in the sense of articulating the necessity of building them and the priority of the church as a unique supernatural institution in doing the building. We have to recognize the difference between humility and timidity. We are called to be humble. We are called to a humility in how we articulate, in how we live our lives. Humility is an essential Christian virtue, and it's one that draws people in because it is so countercultural in every day and age, but I think especially ours. But humility doesn't mean being quiet about what the church actually teaches. Humility doesn't mean whispering the things that are most countercultural, that are most challenging. Humility means giving the glory to God for what he has done for this civilization, what he has done, what he can do for our civilization, and what he is doing right now in each of our lives and in those little mini communities, mini cultures that we are all building. That is genuine humility. The inverse is timidity. That's a different matter. And that is a confusion that we all too often make. But when it comes to a genuine humility, that does not preclude building things. It doesn't preclude bold, straightforward statements of truth. It doesn't preclude making political claims. It doesn't preclude making cultural claims, civilizational claims about what the church is and what she calls us to as communities, as societies, just as much as individuals. And so we then are called precisely out of love to be doing this kind of building intellectually in what we articulate and what we write and what we speak, but also in our everyday lives to demonstrate that there is a better way of being in the world, a better way of living in the world than what secular liberalism has to offer. We demonstrate that that when you put the one true God on the throne, that the result is a beautiful life, a peaceful life, a loving life, a hopeful life, a joyful life, a festive life. And that the idols that are constantly being cycled through the throne in the absence of the one true God are promising nothing of the sort. They're promising constant strife and uncertainty and instability. We have something better to offer, and not to offer it is not love at all. Thanks, Chad. I guess it's up to you.
Thanks so much, Brandon. I will hand it over now to Chad for him to take it away. Go for it, Chad.
Great. Thank you so much. Of course, I agree with your thesis completely. Religion is central. I hear a lot today, and have for decades now, about how law and politics are downstream from culture. And this is kind of the same mentality which tells you and Professor Hahn that you're being anti-evangelical, because there's something positivistic about that claim that law and politics are downstream from culture. Because as soon as you say politics is downstream from culture, you can almost hear someone else in the audience say, but also, right? Various ways in which the culture is being constructed by politics, right? And so you get this kind of feedback loop in which it's the culture is being constructed by the politics is being constructed by the culture. And you get the whole discussions around, manufacturing consent and the way in which elites manufacture consent. And it becomes like this feedback loop of perfect positivism in which you never escape that loop. And the crowd that is accusing you of being anti-evangelical belong to that positivistic feedback loop, that they don't want anything foreign coming in which could disrupt that feedback loop. They think somehow the gospel can be announced in some pure way through attention to the givens, right? This is not how Christianity has ever worked. And in fact, the truly conservative stance, if you want to take a properly conservative view of this, if that word hasn't lost all meaning for you, is not to say that politics is downstream from culture, but that politics and culture are equally downstream of cult, right? Of religio. They're unequally downstream of cult. Cult generates culture, and politics will always privilege a cult. It just will. Because we are religious by nature, there's always going to be a religious dimension of our social relationships to our political relationships. Religion is what binds us together. Now, what we're experiencing now is elites presenting to us new idols, new gods, new images, a new civic religion, which is supposed to bind up all the nations, right? Unite all the families of the nations. And so one of the things people get upset about in talking about integralism is that there's these Catholic integralists, but the the groundswell in our culture has actually been towards a new kind of pseudo-integralism, a pseudo-integralism that's actually made religion at the forefront again, as it naturally should be. Religion is naturally at the forefront. If we look to the ancient city, and I want to talk a little bit about the ancient city, and then unsurprisingly, I want to talk about Augustine's engagement with the ancient city, and then return and come back to the progressive, woke integralist or pseudo-integralist. But if you think about the ancient city is just ineradicably religious, right? Every hearth of every ancient and Greek and Roman home had a sacred fire on it. The sacred fire of the hearth, as Fustel de Coulanges argued in his 1864 study, The Ancient City, on the religious and civil institutions of ancient Greece and Rome. This Vesta on the family hearth, this living flame, was the cradle, as it were, of all civic religion. This is where the human soul was formed. The human soul was formed before this altar. The family was formed and was itself made fit for the rational, relational, and religious nature of the human person. One of the things that Coulanges finds in his 19th century research, which hasn't really been surpassed, though we don't have a lot of good evidence on religion from the classical sources, but Coulanges gives us one of the best accounts, which is that religion permeated everything. There's no non-religious dimension to law, to the tomb, to the home, to the city. There's, if you want to destroy a city, if you want to march into a city and destroy a city, what do you do but destroy the shrines and altars? Because that is the constitutive power of the city. The civic altars are what integrate all the goods of the city. It's the religio that bonds people together, that bonds the family together, that bonds families together in a common good. This is something that every ancient person would have recognized. Not only that religion was constitutive of these goods, but that you couldn't do without it. You couldn't do without the sacred rites of either the home, the hearth, or the city. Even the way in which you imagined family belonging or civic belonging was really not blood and soil. It was really about, do you belong to our cult, right? You recognized a son who forsook the ancestors as one who was no longer in the family. An adopted son was a real son if he was incorporated into the family hearth. Right? Blood, the gene pool is not what constituted the family. Religion was what constituted the bonds of the family. Same for the city. To have civic belonging, you had to be initiated into the life of the civic gods. This is what really bound together a people. It was the rites of participation in worship. And if you want to talk about the freedom of worship is actually incredibly important, but not in the way we Americans tend to think of it. The freedom of worship is this freedom to actually belong, to be united into a common thing. Aquinas, when he discusses the stranger coming into a city, how can the stranger become a citizen? By being incorporated into the cult, by being incorporated into the common faith of a people. That's what binds together cities. That's what binds together the home. That's what binds together the soul. To have a proper, true, and good religion gives integrity, gives the soul order and peace and harmony. To have false religion, to have a religion which is leading one into falsehood, is to have something which is a disintegrating religion, something which disintegrates the soul, something that disintegrates the home. How much has woke politics actually threatening to deform families, for example, or deform the nation, deform football games even. The ways in which religion actually, you can watch it either be integrally ordering of the good of people, or you can watch it be disintegrative of their good. And this is the basis of Augustine's engagement with the ancient city, is to make the central question for our evangelical engagement the question of true or false religion. On true religion is one of Augustine's great contributions, but that's also the theme of the whole City of God, is to assess the religion. What is the religio which constitutes the structures? We want to talk about systemic evils right now, right? But we do so in such a perverted way because we actually don't know what the structural goods are to even be able to talk intelligibly about what structural evils are. And so we sort of have it half right. The progressives have it half right that there's something religious to all of this, that there's some sort of sacred order, and that by being beyond certain norms, you're kind of exiling yourself or canceling yourself, right? This is the true sense of what a society and a politics is based on, is cult. A cult generates culture. False cult will generate a false culture, or even in Patrick Deneen's terms, an anti-culture, right? Or an anti-politics. This, to riff again off Deneen, is why Rome failed. Rome fails because its religion isn't true, not because it's religious. Rome fails not because they are a religious culture through and through, and they didn't have some Augustinian idea of the secular. That's bunk. Rome fails because it has bad religion. It's structurally correct that everything is religious. It's substantively false in what it worships. And if we want to think with Augustine as Christians about how to engage the culture, I won't even use the word nuns normally. I think it's a dumb word. I think it looks ugly. It's a stupid word. Sociologists made it up. It really actually doesn't even capture what it's trying to capture. So we should not use that word anymore. Rather, I would say the people who that word describes are people who actually know that the world is religious, but don't have a true concept of religion. That's a much more useful category for thinking about how do you engage people, engage them on the level of what do they think is religious? What do they think is sacred? What do they love? What are they willing to sacrifice for? And then you're talking about something real. Then you're talking about what their heart is ordered to, or you're talking also about what's disordering their heart or their body. Coulange in The Ancient City argues that religion is the absolute master, both in public and private life. The state was a religious community, the king was a pontiff, the magistrate a priest, and the law a sacred formula. Where law and politics had become more independent of religion, where it had detached from religion, what did you see but a kind of collapse? Things began to fall apart. The center would not hold because the ancient city became more and more forgetful of its origins. In a way, people forget why Emperor Julian's call to return to the old gods was powerful. His call to return to the old gods was powerful because it evoked something in the Roman sensibility that getting back to the old religion was how we were going to recover Rome's in its decay. Coulange argues that Roman religion lost power. Now, he doesn't say this, but I think Augustine will tell us that it lost power, lost integrative power, because it wasn't true. With the advent of Christ, the ancient city is changed forever. No longer is the city governed by 1,000 false gods, but by one true God. On one level, the ancient city ceases to exist with the advent of Christianity. But on another level, the ancient city remains structurally religious at the level of the family, the city, and the cosmos. The ancient city gives way to the medieval city, not by ceasing to be integrally religious, but by exchanging false religion for the one true faith. This is the burden of Augustine in the City of God, is to demonstrate that this is rational, reasonable. It's reasonable to actually exchange a false religion for a true religion, to demonstrate that even Rome's best men were actually moving towards monotheism, that even they could recognize, though they tolerated false gods, even their best men could recognize that the many gods of Rome were false, were fictions, were noble lies. The distorted lens of the pagan gods disordered the city, disintegrated the city, and it fell to the divine revelation of the God-men to bring the principle of order back. It is right and just. Augustine is, in a sense, not the only one who makes these kinds of arguments, but he makes them so magisterial that we look to him in particular. We look to the way in which his own point in history, from his conversion to the faith in Milan under the strongly pro-Nicene Bishop Ambrose, to the end of his life, he witnesses a massive transformation of the Roman Empire. He watches Emperor Theodosius crush the remaining pagan shrines in Rome. He watches a city in which, or rather an empire, in which you have the nominal Christianization from Constantine to Theodosius, at the same time as you have the scapegoating of the church for Rome's own decline. I think to bring us back to the progressive integralist, the progressive pseudo-integralist has reoriented our gaze, what we look at in terms of prioritizing the highest goods of sex and race. These are not the same gods as the ancient city worshipped. These are new gods, but they are no less false gods. And I think what we see today is, especially among Christians, is a little bit like Monica, Augustine's mother, who still early on is still pinching some incense to the false gods at the same time as she goes to worship Christ in the Mass. We still have a kind of a Babylonian mentality in which Israel's sort of flirting with foreign gods. And I think to be truly evangelical, to be truly structural in our approach to an evangelical witness to our culture, we not only have to work from the ground up to build our own communities, but we actually have to pay attention to our laws, pay attention to our local laws, our state laws, our federal laws, and how law can help reorient our gaze. The spectacles, as Augustine calls them, of Rome are how you know what Rome worships. What does Rome look at? What's in their view? Because what's in your view, if it's the transgendered drag queen, your regime's going to become like that. It's a very Platonic insight that you're going to become what you see. And so if these are our spectacles, these are our religio, and they are not only disintegrating the drag queen, they're disintegrating those who look upon the drag queen. And you begin to have a drag queen regime. You begin to have a regime that disorders the political body as well as the physical body. You have men who become like what they gaze upon, which is to say men who become like their gods. And if their gods are false, then they're becoming false. And this is I think what we have in the pseudo integralism of the progressive. The pseudo integralism of the progressive is a disintegrative religion. It also orients us to religion, but it does so by means of a liberal dictatorship that demands from us the most perverse kind of worship possible, the worship of our own immolation into an inhumanity flung far from God's image. The progressive regime that we are seeing today is run by elites. It is not run from the ground up. And so our response as Christians cannot simply be a sort of local love, it cannot simply be the little platoons of love, which we do need, but also a kind of structural love, a kind of structural charity, which is willing, like Constantine and Theodosius, to take the reins of law and politics and even culture and do what the elites of progressive and pseudo-integralism do, to reorient the city's gaze. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Brandon and Chad, for those incredibly rich remarks. I think you provoked a lot here to unpack. I know for me, I'm holding back, jumping in with excitement. So I'll restrain myself for a minute. And for the next 15 minutes or so, I'd like to give each of you a chance to respond and comment and question each other. I think that'll be a really good way to spend the next kind of portion of this. And maybe we'll go in order in the way that we did the remarks. So Brandon, I'll give you a chance here to kick off with a question or a comment for Chad, and then go for it.
Yeah. My mind was swimming, trying to come up with what would be the best question. And honestly, the last thing you said, Chad, about Constantine and Theodosius brought something to mind, because you had mentioned Ambrose earlier, and our eldest son is named Ambrose.
Yeah.
I love the painting of Ambrose barring Theodosius from the Milan Cathedral after Theodosius, against his bishop's express demand, had undertaken a massacre at Thessalonica, I believe. And so it brought to my mind something that is often brought up in these conversations is, what do you do when you don't have an Ambrose? What do you do when you don't have an institutional church that is interested in bringing the Theodosiuses to heel? And of course, at the end of his life, Theodosius had nothing but praise for Ambrose, precisely because of his boldness, because of his faithfulness. But yeah, so that it's something that comes up in these conversations, and I'm curious what you think.
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's a very timely question, because we are facing our second Catholic president to whom bishops are struggling to stand up. So it's very timely for us. I think to, in a sense, ask the question about where are the Ambroses is also to ask the question, where are the Theodosiuses?
Yeah.
And I think our time is unusual in one respect, which is that we don't have any Christian statesmen in this country. We have them in other countries who actually see religio in the way that we do. Mm-hmm. Most Christian statesmen in America are laboring under a false narrative about the essentially privatized way in which we've construed religion in a liberal order. Mm-hmm. And so the question of an Ambrose facing a Theodosius is actually two men who actually see religio in the same way.
Yeah.
And so we have a problem in which actually we need our bishops to see religion in the way that Ambrose and Theodosius saw religion.
Yeah.
And to be able to make sacrifices, to make personal sacrifices, to make reputational sacrifices even for that end. Because if we don't have, we need to have shepherds who are willing to lead on the question of religio and of true religio. I think we do have some of those bishops. I think it's not entirely up to the bishops, though. At the same time, I think we need.
Yeah.
We have plenty of saints in our tradition. We have Catherine of Siena writing to popes. We have St. Thomas More going to the scaffold. So we don't only need bishops, but I think you're right that we do need bishops who are willing to, as it were, speak true religion to power.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I think you're exactly right about the importance of not only not ignoring, but of giving a lot of attention to the top down in these matters. Whether we're talking about, of course, we're just talking about the bishops. When you're talking about law, you're talking about politics, you're talking about policy. These are areas. Catholics were called to pursue the common good, and where is the common good pursued? It is at the level of the civil authority, at the level of the state, at least the temporal common good. And so, for me, and I would say that I emphasize more the bottom up, and that is for me because I don't want to lose sight of the question of what is your average Catholic supposed to do, say, with an idea like integralism, and that's something that's very interesting to me because, my view, speaking of, lacking kind of, the love of bringing the faith to people, my view is that the secular liberal assumptions about what religion is haven't just historically, and of course, even to right now, they've begun often as matters of the elite, but they trickle down into families such that Catholic families are catechized very often, even in their own parishes, with a view of religion that is basically a Stockholm Syndrome view of religion, where we are imbibing and are identifying with our captors. That is private, and that you use even the family as something of a quasi-secular space, so that religion can really only be expressed at Mass or in the privacy of one's own mental prayer. And so what I want to draw out is, okay, that has trickled down into the family. How do we understand a restoration of the proper idea of religio trickling down into the family, and what do they do with it? And that's something that, I want to articulate a lot.
One's more defensive, I think, and one's more offensive. I mean, so they can work together.
Right. Yeah, I think. Go ahead. No, you're up. You're up.
No, I don't really have a question. I sort of want to. I think we agree on that.
Sure.
It's sort of trivial differences on one level if we agree on the bottom up, top down.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it can be. I think it can be a sense taking the offense. I think when we think of the local being defensive, we're thinking of like Benedict doctrine. But
yes, I think that's right.
Right, but I think it can also be
sort of weak defense because it's a weak defense because at the end of the day, people do become what they see. They do conform to what's coming down from the top.
Right.
And so
exactly. I think it can take the offensive though if it's outward looking and if it and not just in the sense of just with neighbors, but also in the sense of participating in the institutions of the neighborhood, of the city.
Running for mayor.
As a community.
Running for mayor of Steubenville, for example.
Right. Yeah.
Do that.
Steubenville's a nice sized town. Pittsburgh's a little harder. Pittsburgh's a little bit big, but
no, I think we do need to think about this. We need to think about municipal level and local level kinds of ways of approaching the top down dimension.
Because people need, and this I think affects the top down. People need proofs of concept. They need to be able to see that another way of being is possible, that another way of life is possible. Because one of the problems we have right now, and this because so much of it is just the secular liberal assumptions trickling down of individualism and kind of mutual suspicion being the order of the day, everything is competition, everything is quid pro quo, that people have no concept that it's even possible to live in any other way than that it's possible to actually share hospitality without fear of judgment, that it's possible to, without fear of other things too, that it's possible to build a genuine community beyond just the family and maybe like one or two trusted individuals. So seeing that then makes the integralist claim more plausible as a way of building something even bigger.
We have to, as Christians, we have to completely ban from our minds the Hegelian notion of historical determinism, historical progressivism. Yeah. That you get all these sorts of arguments. Like I've heard this for decades now. Well, it's 2016 now. It's 2021 now. Right. It's like that's the whole argument behind all of our socially progressive norms. None of them made rational arguments. All of their arguments can be summed up with a Hegelian account of history. Well, right. It's 2016. We have to believe in gay marriage, or it's 2021, right? Yeah. I think
who knows what we're going to have to believe in 2023. I mean,
exactly. Just because it's 2023, and,
right, yeah.
and I think too many Christians have bought this historical determinism, in which is really a false doctrine of providence. It's a false doctrine of providence that Hegel proposes to us that we buy, and it's really not a theology that belongs to those who believe in a provident God.
Yeah.
So I want to use this as an opportunity to remind our audience to submit questions into the Q&A, and maybe we can start turning to some of the audience questions now. We've got a few coming in, well, I suppose I'm the audience because I have a question too. So I'm going to throw in a question to kick things off. But there's a quote from a Christopher Dawson essay that I want to just throw out here and see maybe what we can do with this. Dawson writes, "It is the very nature of the Christian faith and the Christian life to penetrate and change the social environment in which they exist, and there is no aspect of human life which is closed to this leavening and transforming process. Thus, Christian culture is the periphery of the circle which has at its center the incarnation and the faith of the church and the lives of the saints." If I could move that into a question, it's not every day that I get a Wall Street Journal alert with the Eucharist in it, but about 10 minutes ago I just did. To what extent is the proclamation, maybe this is a leading question, but to what extent is kind of the proclamation of the faith and the formation of the Christian culture dependent on us proclaiming the truth of the Eucharist?
Well, I mean that's the center. I mean if we're going to make the claim that Christianity is transformative, that and not just of the individual soul, but of society, of a culture, that it co-ops is too weak a word, but that it transforms, sacralizes that which it comes into contact with. How can we possibly make that claim if we are timid about the Eucharist? How can we possibly make that claim if we're timid about I mean, all the sacraments, the Catholic sacramental theology is, brings that beautiful embodiedness to our worship, to our spirituality. But what more than the Eucharist demonstrates that embodied nature of our religio, that it's not just a matter of spirituality, but that it's a matter of the complete person. In fact, we consume the complete person of Christ. This is to me, you cut your legs out from under you if you are wishy-washy about this fundamental thing. That, I mean, this is what you're getting. This is what you're leading towards, Chris. But if you can't be candid about the Eucharist, that you can't be candid about Christian culture. The very roots of what it could possibly be are right there. And if you that's it.
Can I try to answer Patricia Pasternak's question, which is in the chat?
Go for it, please. Yeah.
Patricia asked, today the city is multiple cities with peoples who have a religion which they believe are true. Why would they believe in an untrue religion? So how do we evangelize those who believe their religion is true? That's a great question, Patricia. And I think that gets to the heart of the question. It is actually, we have to take people seriously as actually, even if they don't use the word religious or religion, they actually have something sacred that they consider to be true. When I see people in, there's a certain house that I know where a young teenager has written Black Lives Matter in the windows of the home, and it communicates that this is sacred to her. This is something religious for her. This is constitutive of what she thinks her home should value as a teenager. And we have to take that very seriously. We have to say, okay, we take you seriously when you put your knee down on the playing field, or when you write Black Lives Matter on your windows. And we see that you recognize these things as sacred, but now we want to ask the question. We know you think this is true, but is it true? To have the interrogative engagement, to say, this is something which might be unclean. This might be something that fragments you. Could we ask the question? Could we ask the religious question? In Confessions, Augustine famously talks about his sins, his external acts, which are vicious, as food for demons on the interior altar of his heart. Whoa, my students are always shocked by that. My sins are food for demons on the interior altar of the heart. You're setting up little Now, there's a question. Is that true or not? Augustine clearly thinks that's true. Is that true? His further argument is that this is what's going on all the time, and that all of us need a purification of our altar. And the question is how are we constructing our view of the sacred? What do we think is sacred? What do we think is, what are the things that we attach ourselves, that we habitually do? And how do those things get raised up to God? How do they get united to God? And Augustine's argument, of course, is that we can make an offering from the interior altar of our heart, but we can't purify it. We don't have anything to purify that. And so we need supernatural religion. We need the God-man. We need Jesus Christ. We need the Eucharist to purify our altar, so that none of us, in a sense, have true religion apart from Jesus Christ. So when we begin to assess what is sacred to us, we can begin to assess it in relationship to the boldest claims of the Christian faith, which is that there is only one altar which will purify our altars. And that puts us in a different kind of conversation. It's the conversation I think we should be having.
I think it's a better starting point for discourse to say that. I think it's a better, it's besides the fact that it's more honest, yeah. It engages the person, even if they don't fully realize it yet, because even as they are doing this thing that I agree there's a religious aspect, not just religious aspect, it is a kind of religion. It is often not perceived as such. It's perceived in more liberal terms, but drawing that out, I think, is a better starting point to say, here's where we actually disagree. This is not a surface thing. This goes to quite a deep level, and the trouble is, and I think there's a sense in which there's almost antibodies against that, which is that our level of trust is so low right now in anybody outside of a small group, that it's so hard to get to that point. But if you find someone who has the openness to hear it, that is such a better starting point for discourse, both between the individuals and to the extent that the discourse happens in a public space. It's a better for listeners to see this, to see the fundamental conversation happening rather than the surface level conversation.
Here's another audience question. and the attendee writes, if we can agree that religion is imperative to building culture, what would be the limits of religion informing politics? So what's the limits of the extent to which religion can inform the law or political life?
I mean, you know, it reminds me of unsurprisingly Augustine's twins of authority and reason. Authority and reason always go together in Augustine. He thinks that we have to have these together, and you need, and religion is a authority, but you also need human reason. You need any authority, religious, spiritual authority, temporal authority, to be governed by what is reasonable. So I think in a sense, maybe a classic Greek philosophical understanding of reason is necessary. I think law is also a limit. To have law which is not positivistic law, or not positive laws which are only self-referential, but to have law which is cognizant of the natural law and of the lawgiver, that's a limit. And so law and reason are certainly limits for the abuse of authority. And I think the questioner probably has in mind the idea of the abuses of authority. And there are often abuses of authority, and we know that the abuse of authority is not limited to temporal power. Spiritual power can abuse authority too. So, but there's a final court of appeal on that, and it is the Pope. So in a sense, I also want to say the Pope is a limit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like your answer, Jack, that you sussed out the question of authority and of kind of the abuse of authority. You know, my first thought was that in some ways the question presupposes an active aspect of kind of the imposition almost of religion, and I would say that religion informs politics. Religion forms politics regardless of any active intent to do so. It simply is the fact of the matter. It is our nature that religion is the nature of religion, that it forms our politics, that it forms our souls, and therefore it forms the souls of our institutions, not of course in a physical sense, or in a literal sense, but it forms the souls of our civilization, regardless of any attempt to impose through authority.
Right. One final question. What role does Catholic education have in forming the religious virtue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, the first thing to say is that you need to teach the virtues correctly. But I think that a Catholic education that is integrally Catholic, where religion is not one 40-minute class among many, where religion, in fact, imbues every single subject that is taught, where the understanding that the duties we owe in justice to God, that is to say, the virtue of religion, don't stop at the door of the church nor at the door of your religion teacher's classroom. But that we honor God by our learning, and by the way we treat one another, and by growing in holiness in every aspect of Catholic education. And so to that end, I think Catholic education has been, over the past couple generations at least, a real locus of losing sight of what the virtue of religion is, because you get this, to use an analogy that is, I guess, somewhat trenchant at the moment. You get a weak or dead version of the thing, of religio, and you are vaccinated against the real thing. You produce antibodies against against the genuine article, such that the genuine article, even more to the person who's been given that kind of inoculation, even more to them than to the nuns, to use a word Chad doesn't like, to someone who hasn't been formed at all in that, is the real article actually becomes hateful because it seems to go against the weak thing that you've been taught, that goes against a virtue, a vision of religio that is completely captured by liberalism. And so yeah, I think Catholic education, rightly understood, though, and I'm hopeful, and I've seen in my own situation here in Pittsburgh the bubbling to the surface of new forms of Catholic education. They're taking this seriously, precisely because the stakes are so clearly high now in a way that they were not so clear before. Precisely because the results of foregoing this kind of not just education but immersion in Catholicism in the classroom and in the family, the results are clear. We're starting to see, like I said, bubbling to the surface, sometimes against the wishes of institutions and bureaucrats that wish things would remain the same. But that's the kind of thing that's going to, that's the only way that the faith is going to survive as a going concern in this country, is if there's the kind of education that makes it a plausible way to organize your life.
Wonderful. Well, Chad, Brandon, it was great chatting with you guys. Thank you for being with us. Thank you to the participants who are here today and throughout the past 3 days. It's been a wonderful exploration of these various dimensions of Christian love. It's given me an enormous amount to think about as a Catholic, as a teacher, as a father and a husband, as a citizen. So thank you all. Thanks for being here. For those of you who are joining tonight for the discussion session at 7, we'll see you there. And thanks again. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.